Picture this. You're in ancient Egypt, thousands of years ago, and humanity has just dreamt up one of the absolute most terrifying creatures in the history of mythology. Today, we're going to examine the ultimate underworld monster. And she's not just some random mythical beast. She's a creature of profound moral terror. Her name is Ammit. So get ready, because in this explainer, we are completely unpacking the anatomy, the history, and the incredibly chilling purpose behind the ancient Egyptian devourer of the dead.
But to really understand Ammit, we actually have to start by asking ourselves a pretty dark question. What happens when you die a second death? You see, for the ancient Egyptians, the initial death of your physical body, that wasn't the end of the road, not at all. It was really just a transition into the duat, which was the Egyptian underworld. But down in the duat, there was this massive looming risk of ultimate, eternal annihilation, literally a complete erasure of your soul. This idea of this second death was hands down the absolute worst fate a person could possibly suffer. And as we're going to see, there was a very specific, horrifying entity just waiting in the dark to deliver that exact punishment.
So let's meet the entity that haunted the nightmares of an entire civilization, the Devourer of Death. Now, ancient Egyptian religion was incredibly complex, right? It was absolutely filled with gods of the sun, the river, the harvest. But Ammit was different. She wasn't just some abstract concept of evil. She was a highly specific, totally functional nightmare designed purely to enforce cosmic justice. Basically, if you lived a life full of chaos and cruelty, Ammit was the beast waiting for you at the very end of the line. And her very name tells us exactly what her job was. Ammit, or MMWT, in the ancient tongue, is a compound word. The first part, M, is a verb that literally means to swallow. And the second part, MWT, signifies the dead. Put it all together and you've got the devourer of the dead, or the swallower of the dead. But she wasn't just indiscriminately snacking on anyone who wandered into the afterlife. Not at all. She was specifically waiting for the dead who had been judged as failing to abide by the code of truth, a core concept the Egyptians called ma'at. If you broke the rules, well, you became her meal.
And this singular, terrifying purpose translates into a literal recipe for a nightmare. Ammit was this deadly hybrid made up of the three absolute largest man-eating animals known to the ancient Egyptians living along the Nile River. We're talking the head of a crocodile, the upper body and four legs of a lion or a leopard, and the massive, powerful hindquarters of a hippopotamus. The message the ancients were sending here is totally unambiguous. By combining these three deadly apex predators into one single beast, it meant that absolutely no one could escape her grasp. She is, without a doubt, the ancient world's ultimate apex predator of the soul. But here's the really fascinating part. She wasn't just some mindless, raging beast. In ancient depictions, like the famous papyrus of Ani, she's actually wearing a very specific headcloth. It's a tricolored nemes, which is that iconic striped headdress worn by pharaohs as a symbol of kingship and absolute authority. Now, putting a symbol of royal, pharaonic power on a terrifying hybrid monster shows us that Ammit wasn't just a rogue animal on the loose. She was a fully sanctioned enforcer of cosmic law. Think of her as the ultimate underworld bouncer, operating with the complete authority of the gods. To really see her in action, we have to imagine stepping into the Hall of the Two Truths. The Judgment of the Dead, which is famously detailed in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead, was this incredibly rigorous, high-stakes ritual. First, the deceased had to recite the Declaration of Innocence, basically swearing they hadn't committed a specific list of 42 sins. Second, the jackal-headed god Anubis would guide them up to this massive scale, where their heart, which represented their very soul, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. Third, the ibis-headed god Thoth stood by as a scribe, ready to officially record the final result. And all the while, sitting right next to that scale in a crouched position, was Ammit, just waiting to see if it was dinner time. Everything, and I mean literally everything, hinged on this final balance. If your heart was lighter than the feather, proving you lived a good, truthful life, you passed the test. You were granted passage to Aru, the heavenly reed fields, to live in eternal paradise. But if your heart was heavy with sin, if it outweighed the feather of truth, you failed. And the consequence was immediate. Ammit would lunge forward and devour your heart. And without a heart, you were completely soulless. You were denied the afterlife, forced to suffer a restless, eternal second death, trapped forever in the dark realm of the duat.
Now, as absolutely terrifying as she was, there's actually a bit of tasteful irony to this whole situation.
You see, the Book of the Dead was essentially a magical guidebook for navigating the underworld. Wealthy ancient Egyptians would actually be buried with their own customized, personalized copies, complete with all the right spells and declarations to guarantee they would pass the judgment of the dead, and completely bypass punishments like the lake of fire. And because so many affluent people were entering the afterlife with this literal magical cheat sheet, ensuring their hearts would balance perfectly, Emmett was essentially left sitting by the scales, constantly hungry. Now, it's really important to clarify exactly what kind of entity she was, because while she played a massive role in their religion, Ammit was a guardian demon. She was not a goddess. Back in the New Kingdom era, that difference was super distinct. Deities had cult centers, they had priests, and they were actively worshipped by the everyday people. Demons, on the other hand, well, they definitely had supernatural powers, but they had no places of worship. Ammit was purely functional. She was tied strictly to one specific location, the Duat, and her horrific hybrid appearance was deliberately designed by the ancients so the dead would instantly recognize her and fear her, which totally differentiated her from the more human-like deities. But surprisingly enough, Ammit wasn't always the primary executioner. Get this, in the Old and Middle Kingdom eras, it was actually the moon god Khonsu who was known as the Devourer of Hearts in the coffin texts. Khonsu would literally burn and eat the hearts of the gods and the impure dead just to absorb their power. But as the religion evolved into the New Kingdom and the Book of the Dead became more standardized, the role shifted. The act of eating the heart was no longer about absorbing power, it was purely about retribution and punishment. And that is exactly when Ammit steps into the spotlight to take over this terrifying duty. As time marched on into the Third Intermediate and Ptolemaic periods, the way artists envisioned this demon actually began to mutate. While that classic crocodile-lion-hippo combo is definitely the most famous, later depictions got even weirder. Take the 22nd dynasty coffin lid of a chief named Ankh-Hor, for instance. On it, Ammit is shockingly depicted with the head of a hippopotamus and the body of a dog, complete with rows of paps. Yeah, pretty bizarre. Later still, in a papyrus from around 300 BCE, she was drawn with a crocodile head but a dog's body. The nightmare was constantly shifting, which just proves that the terror of Ammit was completely adaptable to the fears of the era. And the true power of Ammit's mythology is how it continues to echo right into the present day. I mean, you might actually recognize her modern legacy from the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the show Moon Knight, where she plays a massive, central, antagonistic role. Or maybe you remember her from the classic 90s cartoon Mummies Alive, where she was a slightly less terrifying, dog-like pet. Author Rick Riordan even brought her to life for a whole new generation in the Kane Chronicles. She even popped up as a time-traveling creature in the sci-fi show Primeval. Thousands of years later, and this ancient underworld bouncer still completely captivates our imagination. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and honestly, to a rather provocative question to leave you with. You see, the mythology of Ammit tapped into this incredibly universal, timeless human anxiety, the deep-seated fear of ultimate judgment and being held completely accountable for our actions. So, think about it. If you were standing in the Hall of Two Truths, and your heart was placed on the scale today, would it be lighter than the feather of truth, or would the devourer of the dead finally get a meal? Thank you so much for exploring the shadows of the ancient world with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.